I'd like to call to order this planning and zoning meeting on April 23rd, 2024. The time is 6 p.m. Miranda, can I get a roll call, please?
Commissioner Member Marmon,
Here.
Ritchie. Here. Ferris.
Here.
Waterman. Here. Darling. Here. Becker. Vice.
Here.
Nate.
Here.
And Piper.
Here.
Thank you. All right, agenda approval. Can we get approval of the April 23rd, 2024 meeting agenda?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes.
Anyone opposed? Same sign. Okay, minutes approval for the April 19th, 2024 meeting minutes. If anyone would like to make a motion.
I'll move.
Second.
I will second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Same sign. We can open the floor for public comment, but it does not appear there's anyone here for public comment for any items that are not on the agenda. No old business, so we can move on to new business. Consider amendments to the zoning code.
And really quick, I'll let Emily give the presentation. I just kind of want to give everybody a quick rundown on this one. So we adopted our zoning code 2021, July of 2021. And our sign code was just a little over a year ago. Through working through this from the staff standpoint, we have been jotting down for years just problems that we are coming across where the regulations really aren't working the way that we thought they would work. And in some instances, we're just flat out wrong. So we're starting to bring now forward just some of these amendments. I think these first round that we're doing here, we kind of see as more lower level, pretty easy ones. And then some of the bigger ones that we have in the future, I think we're probably going to bring separately just because they're items that will probably lend to way more discussion and input from the commission. So with that, I'll hand it off to Emily.
So as Charlie said, we adopted the zoning code in 2021, sign code last year. We've been monitoring those changes and just like that through the applications that we've been receiving and some feedback. And then these are going to be the recommended zoning code updates as we've been tracking those. So the first one goes through zoning commission disapproval protest petitions. This just adjusts the code language so it's consistent with Iowa Code section 414.5. It also outlines clear procedures for submittal of protest petitions, and then also outlines that it needs to be submitted to the city clerk. And then it also separates it into 3 different sections based off of the type of protest that's being submitted. So whether that's zoning commission disapproval or through disapproval or denial through the commission or city council, or whether it's from the public protesting a decision that was made. The second is just on public hearing notices. So currently our zoning code outlines a specific sign size for public hearings, specifically for rezoning requests. Staff is finding that the signage is small. So if you have driven past Emerald Bay, for example, you can't really read the signs. There's no sidewalk there either. For when that rezoning request was going through the city approval process. So we're just recommending not specifying a specific sign size, but then also having, rather than staff go out and put out the signage and design the signage, to require that the applicant organizes the sign with the information relative to the request, and then having them install it on the site. It also clarifies the duration of which signage must be fixed for.
Can I ask a question? Who's going to check to make sure they put it up 10 days before? And what's the penalty if they don't?
Delay in hearing is the penalty. Obviously that'd be on there. I think from a staff standpoint, we'd have to make sure that everything was on there. That'd be on us to just go out there and make sure everything's up when it needs to go up. I don't want to say sometimes it could be on the honor system as well too, but We'll probably figure out a way, and I don't know if we've thought through this one fully, we'll probably figure out a way for some sort of confirmation to come in before we mail out our notices that they've taken care of this issue, so get it on the agenda for the next hearing.
Charlie, do we know how other cities handle that? I'm only thinking about, working with Indianola. I want to make sure that's similar to working with other cities for some of these builders.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we kind of went through and looked through some other city requirements, reached out to some. For the most part, and I'm looking here, we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cities that we looked at. And 5 of the 9 required that an applicant install the sign similar to what we're doing. 2 of them had absolutely no, or excuse me, 3 of them had absolutely no sign requirement, and Clive was the only one like us where a sign is required and installed by the city.
Charlie, do you know the other cities that require signs, if have they removed size requirements, or do they have size requirements?
I don't know if we looked at that one necessarily, so go ahead if you've got any background on it. I know you've looked at this a little bit more than me.
I think the intent, at least like from staff perspective, is that we give them a template that they're gonna fill out, and that we, based off of the location and the size of the lot that's being rezoned, that the signage is based off of that. So they'll have that template to fill out. They can take it to a sign contractor to actually build out that sign or print it out. And then we'll have to take a look at scaling of those sizes based off of the size of the site.
I would say my only concern with that makes sense. My only concern with not having just the way that it's written is that it could feel arbitrary versus formulaic. So it sounds like the intention is for it to be somewhat formulaic based on what needs to go on the sign. That's my only concern, is that it could feel arbitrary just because it's not laid out as such.
Yeah, and I think what we'll do is we'll probably have some guiding documents that are kind of part of the application process that will explain that, to take that arbitrariness out of it. So, if it's this size of property with this size of frontage on this type of road, you'll be required to have this type of sign.
Okay, so they would know going into the
Good.
proposed rezoning.
Yep,
Okay, perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was my concern.
So on the, like a minimum requirement, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Depending on what it
Yeah.
is, yeah, perfect.
Yeah, because right now, what is it, 18 by 24 inches, and I mean, I can't,
Minuscule.
I know what they say, and I'm lucky because we put them up, but I don't know how anybody else can see those, so.
So this slide just merges the 3rd and 4th recommended changes. So this just speaks to accessory structures. Number 3 just clarifies setback requirements. Staff just felt that this was confusing, so we just wanted to make sure that it was straightforward as to the intent of the code section. And then the recommended changes also clarifies that detached accessory buildings such as garages, sheds, above ground pools, that those would be considered as accessory structures that are counting towards like the size requirement, but then also the maximum allowable that you're allowed for a parcel. So if you have a shed and a detached garage, you can still have a trellis or those kinds of items, or a pool. This also increases the maximum total size of all detached accessory structures for agricultural zoned properties. So right now the minimum is 1,800 square feet. We actually bumped that, or proposed to bump that up to 2,700 square feet, just because we've been having multiple Board of Adjustment variance requests for that, so they can store items to maintain those larger acreages. We're also proposing that for that requirement, the lots themselves have to be a minimum lot size of 15 acres. And then we're also recommending that accessory structures cannot exceed 50% of the total principal structure area. So that way it's not bigger than, or at least half of a dwelling size.
Theoretically, how many structures could you have? I got confused in this. I gotta be honest about this, because it says it can't exceed a total of 1,800 square feet. But the garage can't be over 600. And an accessory building can't be over 120. So that's only 720 square feet. So what can you do with the other 1,000 square feet?
So what that says is that regulation does not prohibit the construction of at least one detached garage not to exceed 600 square feet. And one detached accessory storage building not to exceed 120 square feet. The code says that you are not allowed more than 10% of your property be accessory dwelling. So then that takes into account, well, if you have a very small property, you can exceed that 10% up to those square footages.
Yeah.
So it's really just implementing that on smaller properties. But if you have a larger property, say you have a 1 acre property, then that 1,800 square foot would kick in over those smaller amounts.
How many structures can you have?
Two.
That's
Two
it.
two accessory structures is what we limited to.
This is just for residential?
No, so our code, no, this covers everything. The 2,700 square foot allowable accessory structure is just for agriculture. Because as Emily stated, we've had a lot of variance requests come in for larger properties in town. Where we say you have 1,800 square feet and they say, I need something bigger than that. I have all this equipment I need to maintain my yard. I can't fit that in an 1,800 square foot building.
So I think what I'm confused by as well as Alan, it says shall not prohibit the construction of at least one detached garage, so you can have.
So what comes?
You could have two buildings, so you could have two detached garages if you want to.
600 foot.
Yes,
Square feet.
yes.
3, you have 6 100 square foot buildings.
No,
No?
Two
No.
total buildings.
two total buildings.
Does it say 2 total buildings in there?
Yes.
That's
somewhere.
2, first sentence.
Yep.
Oh, well, I skipped the first one. Come on, guys.
If you have an above ground pool, you could only, I mean, isn't that kind of temporary? Are you thinking an above ground pool with some sort of permanent structure around it?
Does that constitute a pool house? Or a pump house?
Yeah, I think it would include all of that. So, the above ground pools as we see them, I think are just more, I know a lot of them are temporary in nature, but, there's also a lot that are permanent in nature as well too. So, I mean, it depends on what type of above ground structure you're having in that instance. I mean, I know you can go to Sam's Club and get one pretty easily, or you can have one more professionally installed. So our point was that's more of a above ground structure because it is above the ground, where like an in-ground pool is a little bit different. That's not really seen as a structure from an aesthetic standpoint. Happy to have more discussion about it. Like I said, these are our proposals, so.
And maybe there's more language deeper into text. Does it have offsets from property lines?
Yes, yeah, 5 feet.
5 feet. Okay, I must have glossed right over that then.
It might not be in this one right here, but it is within our code somewhere.
Got it. Okay.
But I want to go back. Does the minimum square footages make sense, or do I still have you confused?
I don't understand why the 1,800 square feet is in there. What's that? What's
That's
that?
the total size that we limit it to. So irregardless of the size of your property, you can't have more than 1,800 square feet.
Above ground accessory structure.
But. Okay, so you could have an 1,800 square foot storage building?
There's a lot of other things to look at as well too. You know, it can't be larger than the principal structure on the property, so you can't have a 600 square foot single family dwelling and an 1,800 square foot accessory building. We don't allow for that because accessory buildings have to be smaller than the principal building. But if you had a 2,000 square foot house on a half an acre property, you could have an 1,800 square foot accessory building.
Well, wait a minute. It says proposes that accessory structures cannot exceed 50%?
It's just the attached.
Those are attached. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So that issue, and I'll jump onto that one real quick, we're seeing a lot of things where a single structure is being built where 90% of the structure is a garage and they have a little room here, and by our code, that's allowed. So we're trying to limit that within city limits.
Gonna eliminate man caves in the garage.
I mean, they're very popular.
As long as there's a house there, it's okay, but like you can't, what we're trying to say with that is you can't build. Essentially a machine shed with a bedroom in it and say, okay, this is now a single family dwelling, because it's not a single family dwelling for all intents and purposes. But our code would allow for that right now without this language. We're not saying that you can't have a house within an 1,800 square foot or in an A1 zone property, 2,700 square foot with a room in it where said man cave could take place.
So how does this factor in? So to the real world examples that are popping to my head are the two, we're in Quail, whatever, right?
Yeah.
The two Quail Meadow, thank you. The two large garages that have been added on to the existing single family homes. How does this, the way you're describing it, makes it sound like it wouldn't exclude that type of situation, but I'm just looking for clarification on that.
It really depends on what the square footages are on all of that, so I don't know right off the top of my head how those percentages broke down in that one, but. Again, it would say that that garage cannot be more than 50% of the total square footage of the building on the attached structures.
Okay,
And it's only a garage because of the garage door probably, right?
Yeah. Does that make sense?
yeah, and it's 50% of the total area
Yep,
then,
so
once it's
If you
attached,
have a
not,
3,000 square
okay,
foot
that makes
structure,
more sense.
1,500 could be garage, well, it'd have to be under 50%, so
Yeah.
14,990.
yeah.
1,499 could be.
But if you
garage.
had a 2,000 foot house and you were adding on to it, it could theoretically be another 2,000 square foot garage attached because it.
99.
1999. Okay, not 1,000 square, not
Yeah.
half of the house
Yeah.
principal structure.
Yeah.
That's what I was
Yeah.
looking for clarification on. Okay.
So I'm just gonna talk out loud so I can figure it out maybe too. So this agriculture one of 15 acres, minimum of 15 acres, the biggest thing they can build is 2,700 square feet.
Yeah, so what we did is we just went 1.5 times the size
And that's
of the current one. And we did that plus kind of went back and looked at some of the variances requests that we've had and nothing was, I think the biggest one we had was like 2,650.
And they have to be in city limits.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
That's huge for sale.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Acres period.
but you know, we don't have too many A1 zone properties.
Not big enough. Where did 15 acres come from versus like
That's the
5
minimum,
acres?
minimum lot size for A1 zoning.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Are there any full one to be created? Are there any existing
Yes.
that are less than 15 acres that are A1 zone?
Oh, probably, yeah. I'm sure there's a lot that are grandfathered in through the years on smaller lot sizes that are zoned A1. I mean, I'm positive there is. I can't think of any right off the top of my head necessarily, but there would definitely be some. So, yeah, if it was an A1 zone property, but only 5 acres, it's not gonna be able to fit into this exception. Really, as the city develops, what we're trying to do is make sure that we have grounded development and. I mean, I know a lot of people like larger lot sizes and stuff like that, but within a urban setting, that's not always the best way to go about development. So just. We know that they're out there. We know that there's some areas where it would work with existing lot sizes and that's fine. But as we grow, we just want to make sure we're able to grow methodically in the city.
So the fifth recommended code update is in regards to our fencing. So this just proposes a setback of fencing from sidewalks and recreational trail easements of at least 2 feet and then a setback of at least 5 feet to public alleyways. Just so that way in those alleyways, we can ensure that if there's, traffic that's moving there, that it can fit within there, so. And then it also clarifies that fences and walls should not be constructed on vacant lots unless there's a special exemption from the Board of Adjustment or if there's a submitted site plan that it's approved by the city council. So those are the recommendations on that.
Question about location. This is D and E. And I'm looking at page 1042, fences and walls. And there's an A and a B. And then there's a C that says features, and then D is swimming pool exclosures. And E is fence frames. I'm confused where this goes.
Yeah, hold on one second. We might have had that wrong on there. And if we did, that's my fault. But give me 1 second.
It's a good thing you brought paper, Alan.
Yeah, 16504. Four.
Oh, thank you. It's right there.
He has paper too.
Paper backup.
Yep.
So I think what we would do in this is we're adding those, the fence setbacks and the vacant lots into D and E, and then everything else would slide down. So D, swimming pools enclosures would become F, and everything
Okay.
else would,
They're
yeah,
gonna put it in after decorative features.
yep.
Another thing, and I think it's in there, you still have to have the good side out.
Yes, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, on the fence frame section, the frame of the fence, including post rails and supports, shall be placed on the inside of the fence and facing towards the property in which the fence is resting.
Thank you.
The sixth recommended update is to allow for setback averaging. So this just essentially allows for setbacks to be averaged to provide flexibility for residential infill development. So for example, if you had existing houses in the set building, setback line was this black line right here. You could essentially move the house into the required setback, just that way it's in line with what the character of that neighborhood already has. So this is kind of essentially going to be more utilized in neighborhoods that maybe had conforming setbacks at one point, so your historic districts, or, you know, we have, is that one that's, that we're getting some building permits on, I can't remember.
Down south of town, you're talking? Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't think what the development is, but.
But essentially at one point they had conforming setbacks and now they don't. But instead of requiring houses to be set back, maybe past where, you know, some people already have their rear yards, maybe just allowing them to average the setbacks so they can get closer to the street rather than having them behind the rear
I guess
yards.
another good example too, just a little bit closer down, the Habitat for Humanity house on Boston over there, when that was getting put up, I know we had to kind of push that back a little bit further away from the other structures just to meet current setback, because we didn't have something like this in there, where if this was in there, they could have brought that a little bit more forward. That one's not as noticeable, but you definitely could have some areas in town where one's gonna stick out like a sore thumb because they're meeting modern day setbacks.
Particularly important for fill-in lots in old neighborhoods.
I will say with this one too, there is a recommended code language for garages, just to make sure that they're not encroaching any further than 25 feet from the property line, just to make sure that we're accommodating for off-street parking and then also preventing vehicles from parking on the public sidewalk. The seventh is just updating the code to meet density goals that are in the comprehensive plan. So right now, the comp plan outlines a density goal of 15 dwelling units per acre for low to medium density residential areas that are designated, and then for medium to high, 25 dwelling units per acre. Our current regulations cap townhouse and row dwelling units at 8 units per acre and then 20 units per acre for multifamily dwellings. So we're just updating that to reflect what the comprehensive plan already outlines. 8 is screening, fencing of outdoor storage.
1 second.
Oh.
Go ahead.
If somebody came forward with a proposal to build a group of tiny houses, they wouldn't fit in anywhere here, would they?
In this particular, I mean, so it really depends on what the makeup of the tiny houses. Are they on one lot? Are they all on their own individual lots? How does that look? I mean, that's really gonna have a bearing impact on how we would look at it. Sure.
Could they be a planned unit development?
Yes. With approval of the commission and council.
So that would kind of negate these other requirements?
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks.
The 8th one is screening and fencing of outdoor storage areas. So this just allows for screening by landscape buffer requirements. So this is going to be 1 overstory tree, 2 evergreen, and 6 shrubs for every 25 linear feet for outdoor storage areas that are in the rear yard. And then it requires any outdoor storage areas that are within the front yard area to be enclosed by an opaque fence.
Remind me when you can have a storage area in your front yard? It's not just anyone can do it, right? I know we just have a few in town.
This is just specifically for industrial sites or where it's allowed.
Industrial, not pertaining to commercial, correct? Industrial.
So you're on like an interpretation thing there, so think through this. So typically this applies to industrial with industrial users having outdoor storage. Outdoor storage can also go as far as Ace Hardware having all of their equipment out front and things like that. We don't necessarily require that stuff to be screened because it's more seasonal, temporary. I'm drawing a blank here on the hardware store.
Circle B.
Yeah, Circle B. Thank you very much. I couldn't think of that. Circle B is a little bit different too, they've got some storage on there. So it really depends on the site plan that's submitted. For the most part, we're looking to have that stuff in the rear yard. Sometimes I think rear or side yard, right? I mean, sometimes, so if you think there's a building that's right here, you could have storage fences kind of going away from the building. So technically it's still visible from the front yard. So that's what we're trying to say is if it's visible essentially from the front yard, it has to be enclosed by that opaque fence. Where if it's in the rear yard, the landscaping is appropriate. I think most everybody here was on the commission when the Sternquist site plan went through, and that kind of goes back to that issue where they had a 10-acre property, and if they had to enclose that whole property by an opaque fence based off our current regulations, fencing or the cost and the maintenance of that was going to be pretty astronomical. So.
Question about is prohibited in all zoning districts. Inoperable equipment is prohibited in all zoning districts. Does that include dead vehicles in residential areas?
Yeah. Yes.
We did those updates last year.
Yeah. Those are not allowed. We have a junk vehicle ordinance separate from this code, but also zoning doesn't allow for it.
Okay.
Nine just talks on loading docks. So this just requires loading docks to minimize visual impacts when they're visible from the street. And adjacent residential uses and when they're facing a public street. So this reducing the visual impacts to landscaping, architectural details, or using colors matching the adjacent primary wall to blend it in rather than having it contrasting from the walls. 10 just outlines additional requirements for trash enclosures. So that's ensuring that there's an accessible path of travel to trash facilities and securing that for commercial, industrial, and residential developments that have shared waste collection facilities. So that's going to be your apartments, schoolyard, townhomes. An example, they have a shared waste collection facility. And then it requires that the enclosures be appropriately scaled and requires that the containers be located within a certain distance of the building that it's servicing. 11 talks on lighting. It allows the wall packs to be utilized on secondary facades. However, glare shields must be utilized, and on primary facades, it requires lighting of architectural quality. So it just essentially prohibits wall packs from being used on the primary facades. 12 talks on drive-through canopies. This decreases the minimum vertical clearance to 9 feet for drive-through canopies, with the exception of fuel pump island canopies, which are required to have a minimum vertical clearance of 14 feet. And do you want to speak on that?
Just gonna say, if you've ever been out north of town and seen the Medicap drive-through canopy, that was a canopy that was built to 14 feet and is incredibly tall. So wanted to take that out.
Thirteen just clarifies that site plans for new builds are to be submitted by a professional such as a civil engineer, land surveyor, land architect, or architect that is licensed in the state of Iowa. We're just clarifying this in the code because it's not in there currently. Other communities do require that, and we've had issues with site plans being submitted.
Napkin site plans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get those sometimes.
So this is just to avoid that back and forth that staff were having, and just ensure that we have professionals that are submitting those, to ensure that they're to scale and appropriate in the zoning code requirements.
And from our standpoint on this one, I think one thing to make sure it's known is when we get those professional site plans, the duration of review is much less. If we don't get a professional one, there's times that it's 6 to 8 months of a review where we're trying to get these changes made and people not fully understanding what we're asking for. So it's just, it's easier on everybody. The process goes much smoother.
I think that one will be a really good date. I remember someone would be like, okay, well, here's a square.
I have a question about the very last part, 3. We have alternative standards. Possibility of alternative standards.
Oh, you're on. You have more on the site plan?
21, is that what we're looking at?
Okay, so.
Yeah, I'm looking at page.
Yeah, so
21.
let me, on the site plan stuff, let me go through a few things on here. So right now, the way our site plan code is written, anytime we have a change of use that goes into a building, there is some level of site plan that is required. And right now, it's pretty much all or nothing. So what we tried to do was really fix in some flexibility in that to where the level of improvements, you know, when there's so much, it's one level of site plan. When they're smaller, it's one level of site plan. What we deal with quite often is, and I'll just use the property across the street where Charlotte's Kitchen is. That was one of the ones that we had a new use going in, required a whole new site plan. It's not a virgin piece of ground where you're going in and developing a new building, placing everything methodically, getting the landscape in the right places. A lot of times you're really trying to kind of pigeonhole these new improvements in here. So there needs to be some level of flexibility to get these to work. I mean, just to be blunt, there's times that you can't get the parking to work exactly like our code says it. There's time that you can't get the level of landscaping in that you need, things like that. So what number 3 does is it provides us a little bit of flexibility to make changes where circumstances with those existing sites come up where we know we need to make some level of change or some level of variation from our code. Doesn't just allow that to come from staff. Obviously, it's got to be part of that approved site plan. It'd be up to staff then to inform the commission, hey, there's a little bit of a difference here. This is why, same thing with city council.
When is a site plan triggered for necessity if you're just putting on an addition?
There's certain
Is there
square
language already?
footages, yeah, I think it's 2,000 square foot or
The cost of the existing building would equal or exceed 50% of the assessed value of the building?
well, it's, so the application. If it's less than a 2,000 square foot addition, no, that's not it. There's a square footage requirement to it, and I can't remember exactly what it is. It's 2,000, is it 2,000 square foot? And then
So-
there's also impervious, go ahead, you can probably speak to this
Yeah,
better than I
it's,
can.
yeah, so if the application is a new building, a building expansion or a building addition of more than 2,000 square feet, it does not increase the total building gross floor area by more than 20% of the existing building gross floor area, then it can be considered a minor site plan. If not, it has to be considered a major site plan, so it's,
There's also an impervious surface component to that as well too.
and that's 4,000
Okay,
square feet.
yeah. So 2,000 square feet on a building, if you're adding 4,000 square foot of impervious surface.
And then the proposed code also includes that if there's a change of use, because right now if there's a change of use, they're required to go through a site planning process. It just outlines that if the cost of the alteration of the existing building is more than 30%, but less than 50% of the value of the building, then it can be considered a minor site plan, so it wouldn't require review through planning and zoning council. Fourteen and 15 talks on off-street parking. So this allows for aggregate to be utilized for agriculturally zoned properties that have a minimum lot size of 15 acres, given that the driveway approaches are paved through the right-of-way line. And then it also proposes that off-street parking not exceed more than 150% of the minimum off-street parking required for the site. 16 is on building design standards. This just carries over the current requirements we have for commercial buildings, that they have a minimum of 20% of clear glass fenestrations over to office and civic buildings. So currently it's not required for those buildings. We're just carrying that over.
Curious about why that requirement?
I think from our standpoint, as we looked at it, I think there was probably an intention to do that, to be consistent with those commercial buildings that we have. We require that for all commercial buildings, and it just wasn't required for office buildings, and just felt like we want to try to encourage glass in those types of buildings, similar to what we do for commercial buildings.
And I think sometimes too, you might have a building that's designated for office or commercial, and then sometimes it switches to the other too. So it's just making sure that they're consistent with each other. 17, 18, and 19 covers feather signs and blade signs. So this just redefines what our current code defines as a blade sign and a feather sign, just to be consistent with definitions that we have in other communities as well as sign professionals. So currently our blade sign definition really speaks on temporary signs. So feather signs, that's going to be this type of sign, but typically they refer to these more permanent building signs. So we just updated that to reflect the standard. 20 talks on building sign calculations. Staff is proposing that sign allowance be calculated based on the linear feet of the proposed building or tenant space of which the sign is proposed for. Currently, it's calculated based off of the square footage of the entire primary building facade, which for some buildings, if it's not a perfect square, it can be difficult for some sign contractors to calculate. But then also this language is standard in other communities too, including West Des Moines, Waukee, Grimes, and Bondurant. And then we're also recommending an overall cap to square footage, just to encourage appropriately scaled signage based upon the size of the facility as well as its setback to the front property line.
The other thing I'll say on this one, we kind of ran these calculations a couple times internally. Really, it's a 1-to-1. We're not really allowing any increase or decrease in signage. We also asked for feedback from a few of our sign companies locally here in town on this, and they definitely talked about how it's much easier to do that because right now, we're requiring them to give us, the width and the height of each facade, and sometimes that's just not easily calculated, or they have to, get out with the tape measure and really go up, where if you're just doing that lineal footage, it's just much easier and cleaner for them to do those calculations. But I think the biggest thing to point out is, for the most part, this is just gonna be a 1-to-1 on just a different way to calculate it.
21 just clarifies and encourages corrosion resistant materials as an acceptable sign material. So right now our code allows for anodized aluminum, which is one specific way of designing a sign. But where the intent of the code is just to make sure that signs aren't going to rust or deteriorate. So we're just including language to make sure that's what the intent is, make that clear. And then 22 just clarifies language on sign backers, specifically as they relate to pan style signs and backers for them. We have like two separate code sections. So one speaks on pan style signage, and then there's a separate code section that allows for backers. But the intent is that we want them to all be pan style, not. It's difficult to explain, I'm sorry. But this is like an example of a pan style sign, actually here in Indianola. But it's essentially a pan that contours around the signage, rather than having a box that you attach letters to or you have graphics on. On that, we're also clarifying that if the sign backer contrasts the color of the wall, then that needs to be included in the sign area calculation. So for example, this one, it blends in with the back of the wall. So the only extents that would be considered for the sign area calculation would be around the signage. 23 just clarifies that signage shall be installed or erected by professional sign contractor that is licensed. I think when we got some feedback from contractors, they just wanted the language to be updated so it's more in line with what other cities say. I think what does ours say?
I think previously it said that it just needed to be constructed by a sign contractor, and it didn't mention anything about the installation or erection of the sign.
Yeah.
Which is definitely something that we, I think, intended to say by using the term constructing, but.
And then 24 just provides specific code requirements for window signage to give staff and sign contractors direction and clarification on code, which currently equates window signage as being the same as building signage. So the proposed code just allows for window signage on primary facades, but it can't exceed 25% of that window area of the facade that it's proposed on. And then for secondary facades, that the coverage can be up to 100% for privacy or sunscreen. However, the graphics and symbols can't exceed 25% of the area, requiring that anything outside of that be solid or neutral.
So I have a question for that. With the sunscreen or whatever. Can't really understand that. So like they have those perforated ones that have like images. Are those permitted then? If it takes up the whole, like,
So they're currently like all regulated outright. There's no guidance onto how they should be regulated. So we're just putting more specific parameters so that way it's not outright that it's.
if I have like a place, I can't have the entire front windows be covered in perforated image as a sunscreen.
No.
But could the entire front be covered by something that was like the sunscreen that doesn't have an image, that's more, that really is just for sun blocking, that's like a solid
Window tint,
color,
essentially.
yeah, like a window tint essentially.
It couldn't be a window tint because our code requires the primary facades to be like a clear glass. So I think it's just on our code, like the intent is that you have on your primary like customer entrances to have clear glass to see in. It's those secondary facades that I think that we don't.
So then how would this tie, if you're including office buildings in the window requirements? How would this tie to something like that where there might be an office at the front that has so much light coming? I mean, I realize somebody can install shades, but a lot of offices choose to install like a,
Shades, awnings, things like that usually are used to mitigate that, which would still be allowed.
but they couldn't do tinting on those front windows.
Well, not on all of them. I mean, we have a percentage of clear glass that's required
Mhm.
in our code. So depending on how those percentages broke down, could you theoretically have some that had tinting on it and still meet the minimum requirement on the percentage for the clear? Possibly, but it's really kind of up to an architect to design that.
I'm gonna throw myself on the bus here. We bought that old Sluggers building and all of that front facade would be, you know, everything facing the highway, correct?
Yeah.
So that was completely covered in an image perforation. We had a window break, so like technically I would not be able to replace that window with the perforation, correct? Under this,
Have to do it quick.
yeah.
Same.
It's not effective.
Yeah. I'm just trying to clarify, maybe that's not a great idea, cause I don't wanna have two windows broken and then we have clear glass, we have a mismatched image and I can't fix it.
Well, and that was a nice improvement to the look of the building.
Correct, yes.
Yeah.
It sucks now, cause I want to take it off and it's really not fun to take off, so.
Yeah, you know, and I think a lot of times what we'll do with that too, and you know, there's grandfathering clauses in there when that actually triggers and stuff like that. What we don't want to do is, have, you have two panels here that are completely covered and then that middle one isn't, and it contrasts and it doesn't look good. So I can speak from our standpoint, I think from a staff standpoint, that we continue to work with people in situations when those come up to make sure that, the intent of the code isn't getting in the way of aesthetically pleasing environments on buildings.
But I think a lot of people in there, I know that place you said, it made it look better when they did it and it helps immensely with the sun. And you can always get a variance too, right?
Yep.
How we explain it to someone if they question, well, why did they get to do it, but we can't.
Yeah,
Grandfather variance.
anytime I ever hear that, it's every single situation.
That's a specific question. April 23rd on record.
But with that, if there's any questions, there's different options that P and Z can take tonight, whether that's recommending approval or sending it back to staff for further review and modifications, just giving us direction. So with that.
I appreciate that we're able to talk through these as they came along. too, so.
Definitely.
Does anybody have any questions, or would somebody like to make a motion?
A quick question, if we approved tonight, what's the timeline look like for getting it?
Good question. Council would set the public hearing on May 6th, would not be able to have the public hearing until June 3rd, so we're looking at a July 1 final approval by council. Technically, it's not officially law until it's published in the paper, so July 9th would be.
Getting technical, if somebody already had stuff in the works, then it wouldn't be.
Yep. In a situation, if somebody's window broke with that defect, yes.
Theoretically.
Maybe repurpose the building. Getting real close, getting real close. Formula,
Much of controversial, that's really. Item of discussion was maybe the size of the buildings. So I don't know if there could be more discussion on that particular item. And where everybody understands it a little bit better.
Sure, we can definitely do that. Again, I think the one thing to note on that particular one is, especially as it relates to size. We're not changing anything other than allowing a little bit bigger of a accessory building on A1 zone properties. And it's that 50% on the attached garages, limiting that. Those are really the two biggest changes I would say on that one. The whole 1,800 square feet and everything, that's already in our code. We've been running with that one for a while. So, but we are happy to maybe do a presentation to better explain that code section. When you work it in every single day, it becomes a little bit easier to fully understand from our standpoint, and we understand that. But if it's something you want us to give maybe a little bit more of a background on at some point, we can definitely do that.
and also, as you said, this is all for going forward, A1 zone, which would require to be 15 acres. Well, I mean, there's not a whole lot of that left around.
No, but we've had a couple variance requests specific to it, so it's one thing that I think we like to do is when you're starting to see the same variance requests come through month after month after month, rather than keep doing variances, let's look at a code amendment, so.
There's plenty of almost variances too that we're dealing with, where they're coming with us, they have an A1 zone property and we tell them, okay, this is your option, you can do a variance, but we can't just approve it outright because it doesn't meet code, so.
And I scale.
I would say as, you know, as it's from you guys and you guys are the ones that deal with it every day, we talked through it, the fact that it's, you know, we kind of went through and clarified everybody's questions. I think a lot of people that are going to be dealing with these specific codes are gonna be confused as it is, so, you know, in the essence to speed up further zoning review, I would, I'll make a motion to recommend or make a motion to put you guys recommended.
I'll second that.
Okay, can we get a roll call vote, please?
Ruchi? Yes. Ferris?
Yes.
Waterman?
Yes.
Darling?
Yes.
Rice?
Yes.
Nate? Piper?
Yes. All right, so Charlie, are there any current project updates?
Not too many to update on that. I think there's been a lot of things that have improved here recently. And we're still working through on some of these bigger PUD developments that we've had, just various things on those processes. So really not too much to update on any of that unless there's any specific questions on anything that's sitting out there right now. Perfect. March building permit report, I think we're a little bit ahead of where we were last year, and seems like metro-wide that is the case. I think developers are getting a little bit more comfortable with development, just with interest rates somewhat leveling off, I think, and infrastructure costs coming down. So everything's good there, but happy to answer any questions on that. The only other thing I want to mention is that, and if you don't already know this, Miranda has accepted the job of the Warren County Emergency Management Coordinator.
Correct.
I want to make sure I got that right. So her last day here is going to be May 17th. We don't know if we're gonna have another planning and zoning commission before then, so if not, I just wanted to make sure the commission knew that, and thanks Miranda for her service to all of you, but we are
Congratulations.
we are in the process of rehiring right now, and trust me, there's not a lack of applications. I think we were up to about 130 today, so.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, great.
Just use AI to go through those.
That's how I put it. As I keep telling everybody just wants to work for me, so.
That's true. You're a good boss.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you for everything that you do for us.
I'm very sad to be leaving, I'm not gonna lie. It's a great opportunity though.
Would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Sure, why not?
all those in favor?
Aye.
There's nobody opposed.
You never know.
Perfect.
You never know. Might wanna
One might want
say-
to sit here. and follow